Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. My name's Roman Zelchenko. I am your host. I'm a former immigration lawyer turned immigration tech founder. I'm the founder of Laborless, an immigration tech company that automates H-1B compliance, and also GMI Rocket, which brings you this show. And on today's episode 27, we've got a guest who is done everything, I think, in the immigration space. Worked in various roles, started a consultancy in a firm, an immigration firm, started a tech company, went through an acquisition, joined a larger immigration firm, worked there, had a successful career, and then recently has left to start another immigration firm. I mean, if you can't learn something from today's conversation, I don't know what to tell you. I'm so excited. So our guest today is Sophy King, and Sophy King is actually calling in from the UK. So I appreciate the late evening call, and welcome to the show, Sophy King. Thank you so much for being here. I don't know why I just said your full name 3 times, but thank you for being here.
It's a good name, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I think as part of this conversation, I was saying because it's in the evening for you and it's afternoon for me. I'm having a drink. So cheers.
Having a drink.
And thank you. I guess you're having a glass. Is that a glass of wine? White wine?
It is. It's a
Nice.
lovely little glass of, quite a big glass of wine.
Yeah, nice. Well, it's
So
okay.
I haven't drunk much of it yet.
Well, we've got a whole episode, so we'll get through the whole thing. I poured myself a Fernet Branca on the rocks. So this is, yeah, I could see by your face is like, no way.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So it's super popular in Argentina, and folks in Argentina drink it with Coke, Fernet and Coke. It's a digestive. I really love it.
Nice.
It's definitely an acquired taste, but I don't know why when I drink this, I get, just enough. I get really zoned in and start to get my work done. So that's hopefully what's going to happen today.
Yeah.
So
maybe I should get some as well.
Yeah. It kind of tastes like licorice, but I think it's delicious. But anyways, thank you again for joining, and I'm excited for the conversation today. I never, when I launched this podcast or the show, even before, imagined that I'd be talking to or even have listeners from honestly anywhere outside of the U.S. and Canada, let alone guests. And in part because I was less educated about everything that has been happening and has happened in the immigration and immigration tech space around the world. So it's such an honor and pleasure to learn about, what's happening outside of the US, what has happened outside of the US. So I'm really excited to hear, your story and your journey, because I think this world is growing smaller and smaller by the day via immigration. And tech is allowing that to happen. Before we really jump in, I just want to say to folks listening, throw in some comments, say hi, tell us where you're calling in from or where you're listening in from, I suppose. I don't know why people I say calling in from as if it's like a telethon.
Yeah, I do as well. Yeah.
I guess it's like an old saying, but we've got a couple of comments here. Ken Nicolin saying, "Hey guys, show your drinks." So we already did, Ken. We're it's a Jägermeister.
Jägermeister. When I was 18, I worked in a pub and I invented a cocktail with Jägermeister as its key ingredient because they had a dusty old bottle of Jägermeister that nobody drank in this pub in the outskirts of London. So I've always been partial to it all.
In the US, at least in college, there's a high consumption of Jägermeister in Jaeger bombs. It's like they're brutal, but we won't get into that today. Ben Sukia says, "Hey, Sophy and Roman, likewise, man. Really excited for this conversation." Branislav, also from London. Hey, good evening.
Hi, Branislav.
That's awesome. Mark Smith says, "Hi." Hey, Mark. Thank you so much. And hey, good afternoon. Good afternoon to you, Ken. So, all right. So I wanted to jump in. I obviously am so excited and interested to learn about everything you built with Peregrine. I'm an immigration tech nerd. And so but to me, I'm always interested in learning, of course, about the person, right? Why they went in the direction they went, why they chose the path they chose, and then of course, like what led them to start their own business or launch a technology company. So obviously, you're from the UK. Were you born in the UK or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Born and bred.
Nice. And so did you grow up in? Because I know you're in Bristol.
I'm in Bristol, but I'm a Londoner.
Londoner.
Really. So I was born in London. I grew up in London. I thought that London was the only place that anybody should ever really live, and I'd never really been to many other cities in the UK. But my husband's from Devon, so when we moved back to the UK, we lived in Spain for a little while. And when we moved back, he said, I don't really want to live in London. And I was at that time working for some people who were based in the States, and they didn't know. I suspect that maybe they didn't know the geography. I don't know. Anyway, I said, look, I want to live in Bristol. It's an hour and a half from London. And they were like, oh, like a kind of suburb. I was like, yeah, kind of.
Right.
So that was fine with them. And I worked from home then, and I've been working from home ever since. So,
wow. When was that? What year?
That was when my son was 2 and he's now 12. So it was 10 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you've worked from home since. So from that perspective, when the pandemic hit and offices closed, I suppose you were kind of already a pro at this whole thing.
Yeah, I pretty much worked from home since he was born, actually. So about 12, 13 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. What was it like? What was it like growing up because I grew up in New York City, and I've been to London once, and I'm curious, what was it like kind of growing up and being a teenager in London?
So being a teenager in London is brilliant. Mainly, I don't know what it's like being a teenager anywhere else, but in London it's good because there's a lot of free stuff that you can do, and the transport is perfect. So there's night buses, there's tubes. You can get around. You can be quite independent. Mm-hmm. You don't have to call your mum and dad to pick you up from stuff.
Right.
So there's a lot of trouble you can get into.
Is the tube open 24/7? No, it's not, right? It closes.
No, I don't know if it is now, because I don't know those things now, because I just stay in my house, even before coronavirus, But it never was when I was a kid. No, I think some lines are. But I bet Ben knows, who's like on the, who's here, because he's much more, with it than I am. But right. I think some lines are nowadays. But when I was a kid, it shut. It used to shut, sort of just after midnight, and then you were on the night buses, which aren't that nice, but they take you where you need to go. So
that's right. Yeah, I was going to ask what happens after the tube shuts down. What do you do? But I guess you take the night bus home.
You take the night bus, and you have to wait ages for it. And then it takes the long route round, and it's like 4 a.m. But
I'll tell you what. We're, I guess, in that sense, lucky that the New York City subway system is 24/7. But it's the same thing. In the middle of the night, you're waiting an hour, and I'm telling you, there are many times where I've fallen asleep and missed my stop and ended up somewhere totally different.
Yeah. It's awful. It's awful. You have to wait for ages. And then, the worst thing about it as well is the lighting. The lighting's terrible. So you've been out all night. I remember this, being 18, I probably actually did still look quite good, even on the tube. But you think you look great, and then you look at yourself on the tube, like the harsh lighting, having waited for an hour, It's not a pleasant experience.
And that's also after a whole evening of shenanigans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
those days are long gone.
Okay, so not much different, just different public transit, but certainly it sounds like it was definitely fun. So, and I know that you then went to university at Cambridge, and one of the things that jumped out at me that I thought was interesting was really curious about. It looks like, I read from your bio that you studied Oriental Studies, right? And did you take Mandarin or any Chinese language as well?
Yeah, so I did. They don't call it Oriental Studies now, because I know in the States that doesn't sound good, right? When I was there, that was what it was called. I think it's now called East Asian Department. So I did only Chinese. So I did Chinese modern language and classical language and literature and history.
Wow. What made you go in that direction? Like, what inspired you to study that?
I don't know, Roman. I don't really know why I did it. I didn't want to do the things that everybody assumed I was going to do. So I was always a reader, and everybody, since I was very small, thought that I should, study English and become a writer or a journalist or something. And I didn't want to. I mean, I read all the time, you know,
Mhm.
but I didn't really want to do that because I thought it was a bit too obvious. And also I wasn't completely sure that I even wanted to go to university. So I wanted to do something where even if I left after, you know, 6 months, a month, I would be able to know exactly what I had learned and kind of measure it, you know. And I obviously didn't know any Chinese at all, like not even one word. So I thought, well, that would be quite good because I'll know. And if I leave, I'll know I'll have a thing that I learned that I can hold on to, you know. And also I thought it'd be kind of cool to learn how to read again because I couldn't remember. I learned to read really young, English, so I couldn't remember anything about it. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to sort of experience that again, you know.
Yeah, you kind of dig into language, you dig into language rules and etiquette and things like that.
Yeah.
It also feels kind of prescient because, I mean, now East Asian studies, particularly folks who learn Mandarin for the global, you know, industry, whether it's in business or in immigration or investment or anything like that, it's super important. So I suppose, I mean, China was not quite the superpower then that it is today, but still really, really interesting. That's fascinating. Did you do well? Did you enjoy it? Or was it kind of like you got into it and thought, ugh?
I really enjoyed it. I don't think I did that well. I didn't get very good marks, honestly, but I really enjoyed it. It was a really weird experience because there were 8 people in our class. So it wasn't like, you know, most people go to university and you have like big lectures in lecture halls and all this kind of stuff. We didn't have any of that. There were just 8 of us. And also we were learning from scratch. So when you learn Mandarin from scratch, you have to learn the tones. There are 4 tones, you know? So like ba, 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 and then ba. So like straight across and then going up and then going down and up and then going down. And it's very difficult to get your head around them and to be able to say them. So we spent the first, you know, several months kind of locked up in a room, just going ba 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 ba, you know, really like a group of little lambs. And then all of my friends were doing kind of philosophy and, you know, like ethics and religion and anthropology and all of this cool stuff. And they were learning this amazing stuff that was brilliant. And I was just coming home every day with this ba ba. So that was a little bit weird, you know. But once you get over the kind of, you know,
the foundation. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it is really cool learning to read and write in another language, and the history is obviously amazing, and the literature is amazing. The poetry is beautiful, you know, and it's a really special thing to be in such a small group. There's also a pretty high dropout rate with Chinese. So there were 8 of us. I think 4 dropped out, but then we had 4 new people kind of come in. So we had an overseas student from the States, my friend Cassie, who lives in DC. She was brilliant. And then we had a guy from Denmark, I think, at one point. And we had somebody from the Netherlands, you know, so it was very international feeling. And then we all spent, in our 3rd year, we all spent 6 months in Qingdao, in Shandong province in China, studying Chinese there in the university. And again, we were really like a tiny little bubble of people in this weird, you know, we weren't even in the main Qingdao University. We were in Qingdao Oceanography University, Qingdao Haiyang Daxue, which is like really like very obscure place to be studying, but kind of cool, you know. So yeah, so it was good, but I mean, I don't know what I thought I was doing.
That's so crazy. And it's, I mean, do you still speak? Did you contain fluency? Like, kind of, how far did you take it?
I was never. I would not say I was fluent. Like I never dreamed in Chinese. I never spoke it. I spoke it well enough that a couple of times when I was in China and I phoned people up, I could convince them that I was from some strange part of China where they'd be like, "Where is your accent from?" And I'd go, "Oh, it's from the western part of China." And they'd go, "Oh, right." You know, like if I was on the phone. But now I really don't speak it very well at all. You know, I don't practice it enough. So I ought to. I mean, when I used to meet my Chinese colleagues in the companies that I worked in, I would speak Chinese to them, and they'd all be really nice about it. But you know, then you run out of conversation. Also, everybody else is so much better at English than you ever are at their language. That it just, if you actually are interested in talking to the person, it sort of starts to feel a bit rude to insist on it being a language opportunity for yourself. You know, I always feel a bit like, actually, I want to hear what you really have to say and talk to you properly. So I don't know, it's a bit of a crappy excuse, but
yeah, no, I've been there. I've absolutely been there with Spanish for sure. where it becomes all about your language lesson, and it's like, no, you just want to communicate with the person.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I was also curious about that because I was wondering if there was some kind of forward thinking in terms of being in the immigration space, right? I mean, here you were learning a whole new culture, a whole new language. You got to study and live abroad for some time. So when you graduated from university with this diploma, did you jump into immigration right away, or sort of what was the first thing that you did?
Well, then I went to Japan, obviously. So what happened was I did German at school. I studied, so actually there is a bit of a pattern. When I went to school when I was 11, so in England, secondary school starts when you're 11, right? So high school starts when you're 11. And in my school, they said you could choose to study French or German. I know this isn't the answer to your question, but they said you can study French or German. And I said, I don't really mind. Like, why would I mind? And so they put me in German. And really what happened, I think after that with me and other languages and other countries, is sort of the same thing kept happening. I kept just choosing the weird one. So I did German. And then after I'd finished school, I had a gap year. Do you guys do gap years?
Sometimes.
So I had a gap year, and in the UK at that time, I don't know if they have it now, but there was a library in our school where you could go and look up like things to do in your gap year, and I didn't have any money. So I chose the cheapest possible organized gap year project, which was to Bulgaria, to go and I think it was to work in some kind of ex-power plant place with disadvantaged women. Anyway, before I went, the Bulgarian government decided, perhaps not unsurprisingly, they didn't want a bunch of unqualified 18-year-olds running their, program or whatever. So instead, the GAP organizers sent us all to Russia. So basically what happened was I learned German at school. Then I spent 6 months in Russia when I was 18. And so then normal people who do that then go to university and do Russian. But I went and did Chinese. To be fair, I'd already signed up for that. And then once I'd done Chinese, then I thought, when you study Chinese, you learn a lot about Sino-Japanese. There's a lot of bad water and history there. And there's a lot of anger, especially on the Chinese side. On the Japanese side, not so much, because a lot of people are quite unaware of the, the things that happened, in the 1930s and that type of thing. I mean, not, anyway, there's a lot of problems there. So I thought, and you hear quite a lot of negative feeling towards Japan when you're in China. So I thought, well, I'd quite like to know about Japan from, firsthand, really. So then I thought, well, could go to Japan. Also, Japan's got this brilliant government program called the JET program. I don't know if you know about that. That's genius. So the government sponsors you to go and be an English teacher, pays you fairly decent salary. So I spent 2 years in Japan, and only after that, then I came back to London and started looking for a job.
Oh, so you taught English in Japan. Were you in Tokyo?
No, I was in Tottori, which is tiny. Nobody's ever heard of it. The only thing it's famous for is it's got some sand dunes, and there was a book written about the sand dunes that was made into a film that not many people have seen. And it's also famous for pears. It produces these big round pears. Very nice. But nobody's heard of them ever. Obviously.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Cool place, Tottori. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you came back from Japan. I'm assuming you picked up a little bit of that as well while you were there.
I tried quite hard learning Japanese when I was there, so I got reasonably okay at Japanese. Yeah.
And so you came back, and what kind of a job were you looking for? I mean, you had all this international experience, a lot of language skills. Was it something related to that field, or what were you kind of thinking about?
Yeah, so I thought I'd like to go and work in something international. So I signed up to a couple of Japanese language recruitment agencies and gave them my CV and stuff. And then I went and I got a job at the British Council, which is the British, it's like the equivalent of the Goethe Institute or the, that type of thing, so it's sort of does a lot of work overseas and teaches English and all of this type of stuff and international stuff. Anyway, it's very hard to get a full-time permanent job at the British Council. So I had this temp job as an admin assistant, filling out, forms for people's expenses when they bought tube tickets, which I always thought was so stupid, because I spend like an hour filling out these forms in quadruplicate for people's tube tickets. And I was getting paid about £5 an hour. And the tube tickets only cost about £2.50 an hour. I mean, for a tube ticket, So I was getting paid double Do you know what I mean? Like somebody, I just thought this is ridiculous. And then I'd have to give these forms to everybody. It was like something out of a film or a book. You know, I'd have to give these forms, you know, all these copies of. Anyway, I was doing that, and I just thought this is crazy. And the agency kept giving me interviews. They thought I had a bubbly personality, so they kept trying to send me for jobs as people's PA and stuff. You know, you'd be great as a PA for this guy in this bank or whatever. And I'd be like, I've got a degree from Cambridge. I don't want to be a PA. You know, thought that was a bit unfair. So anyway, so eventually they sent me this you know, opportunity at Immigo, which was an immigration company in Chiswick in West London. And I grew up in West London. I grew up in Ealing, and at this point I was in my 20s and I was living in South London, near Brixton, which is much more like street and cool. I was like, I don't want to get back to West London, but actually I am clearly just a posh West London girl, you know. So anyway, so I nearly didn't even go to the interview, but I was so desperate for something where I could have a paid holiday, because my temp job, I didn't have any holidays or sick leave or anything like that, you know.
Wow.
And I'd completely run out of money. Like we didn't have any money at all. So I went to the interview and I wasn't sure at all. But then when I got to the interview, I was interviewed by some people who I really instantly liked and admired. And so then when they offered me the job, I was really pleased. So really, it wasn't like I wanted to work in immigration. I was interested in it because it was international, and I got the opportunity because I spoke Japanese, although you didn't need Japanese for the job. And then I took it because I liked the people, you know.
Wow. That's fascinating.
It's totally random, you know.
It's crazy to think that you something may have happened that day and you're like, man, I don't want to go to this interview.
Yeah.
You know?
And I nearly didn't get the job because I'd done my CV in my lunch break or something, or while I was also filling out somebody's travel expense form or something. Basically, I'd done my CV in a hurry and I'd left out an entire year. You know, I just skipped a whole year. So it looked like I'd been in prison or something, you know. So I went to the interview and we had this interview and it was great. And I was like, oh, I really like this. It was Kyler Fields who interviewed me. I really like Kyler a lot. So he, you know, I remember he interviewed me and then I left and then he sort of called me back. I was walking down the street. He was like, hey, come back. And I was like, yeah. He was like, so what were you doing in like 1993 or whatever it was? I was like, oh, I just can't add up. You know,
you can always point to it and say, look, I wasn't a math major. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's not what you want from me.
Right. Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. I mean, clearly they saw something that, you know, overshadowed the fact that, for example, you left out this year. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. So what was that, you know, so you joined Immigo, and what was that role that you took on? I mean, what were you doing?
That was a global consultant. So you know how global immigration works. So global immigration consultant then, and to a very large extent now, I was just the front for cases to other countries. So, you know, the client would hire Immigo. Immigo would say, yeah, sure, we can get you a work permit for France or Nigeria or Switzerland or wherever. And then my job, aged, you know, 23, was to call up the lawyer or the immigration expert in France, get their advice, understand it, and package it all up and give it to the client, you know? So you're just the sort of intermediary, really.
So you were kind of you were almost like a project manager. I mean, you're connecting the folks who need the visa, the work permit, et cetera, with the providers, I suppose, either on the ground in the country or elsewhere.
Exactly. And the thing about global immigration is that there's a big flaw in the middle of it, which I think should be solved with technology, actually. But there's a big flaw in it, which is that basically if your end provider, so imagine you've got a global case to France and you're working with an excellent French provider who's really wonderful, perfect in every way. You can't actually really very easily let your client just speak directly to that end provider, because if you do, and the provider's really amazing, your client might just want to work directly with them from now on, you know, and they might want to, they might question why they're paying you, you know, they might certainly, even if they want to go through you, they might want to pay you a lot less than they are paying you. And if your provider in France is not very good and is, you know, slow to reply to emails or rude to the client, or, you know, forgets something or gives bad advice or something, and in that case, if you're not involved, you can't stop it. You can't see what's happening and you can't stop it. And then when the client escalates it, it's still your fault, but you know nothing about it. So basically you're this kind of intermediary who's there and you're trying to help, but sometimes you have to be there. often more for kind of business reasons than for actual kind of real client-driven reasons, honestly, you know. And I think that it's a bit of a slow and expensive and inefficient way of doing it, you know.
Yeah. That's interesting. In a sense, I suppose some clients really want that maybe white glove service or that intermediary to handle things, but it sounds like you kind of get the short end of the stick either way you look. If the person's great, there's an incentive to go around you. If the person's not great, you're going to be the one who bears the brunt.
It's really difficult. So if you're a good global firm, and there are lots, obviously, of good global immigration firms, which are excellent, and the things that they should be doing and often are doing is providing good technology, good kind of global advice, you know. So the client calls you and says, oh, you know, should I send my guy to Belgium or Luxembourg? You know, should I send him to Saudi or could he be in UAE and his, you know, could his family be here and he be there? You know, that type of stuff a global firm is good at and understands. Also good supply management and all that type of stuff. But there's a bunch of stuff and good kind of general advice and strategic awareness, you know, like all of that stuff is really good. But the actual kind of down to the casework, I think there's a place for the global consultant. But I think, well, certainly the way that I was doing it 20 years ago, I don't know if we've moved on quite as far from that as we maybe should have done, you know.
Well, I guess, you know, as technology moves forward, maybe there will continue to be more and more innovative ways of doing that. So I guess you stayed here for a number of years, and then I think you moved over to Ogletree, right? Or was that sort of can you talk a little bit?
That was an Immigo thing.
Yeah, right. It was.
Immigo
okay.
and Ogletree had a joint venture. And so Immigo was rebranded as Immigo Ogletree, or, you know, a lot of the employees of Immigo were kind of rebranded as Immigo Ogletree employees. So I think that's why my LinkedIn says Immigo Ogletree, but I never worked for Ogletree. I just worked alongside or with a lot of the people from Ogletree.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So you're really at Immigo for a number of years, and then I think you had one more job before you really broke off on your own.
Yeah. So then I joined Prolink Global,
right?
Andrea and Lance's firm that was headquartered in Florida, and they were the guys who all worked from home. So at that point, so with Immigo, I had moved to Spain. I'd moved my team to Spain. And then I wanted to go back to the UK, and I thought it would be good to move on and have some new experiences. You know, I've been at Immigo for quite a long time. So I joined PLG as their Director of Knowledge Management, which it's a sort of fancy job title. I think I was, you know, it was a pretty small firm at that point, and I was supposed to be sort of helping set up their content and their knowledge and all of that type of stuff. And I was quite involved with the structure of how the operations was working as well, you know.
Did you feel that was a step up from the previous roles, or was it kind of taking your experience so far and then doing something new and different?
It was just new and different. Yeah, because I was already, so at Immigo, I'd started as a consultant, then I became a manager, then I became, then I guess I can't remember what my job titles were, but basically I was running the EMEA global team. And then my son was born, and so I took 6 months off, and my amazing colleague Susie took over that job. And so when I came back, I wasn't gonna, you know, like give him back my job and everybody goes back down. So I became the Director of Consulting at Immigo, which was really like the most ridiculously fancy way of saying that it was just me. I just sat in a room on my own, like writing reports. And I used to run projects, basically. If the clients came in and said they wanted, you know, where's the riskiest place for us to not get a work permit, or, you know, that type of stuff. That's what I did. So I already had this like fancy job title. And then when I went to Prolink, I had pretty much the same fancy job title and pretty much the same type of job. So it wasn't really a kind of up or down. It was just you know, what else is out there, you know? And
it sounds like the job that you had at Prolink sort of foreshadowed Peregrine, because director, did you say knowledge management?
Yeah.
It sounds like you're really the sort of central place of information from the entire world as far as immigration and work permit updates and, you know, other visa requirements. I'm curious, you know, when did you start to think to yourself, because I think a lot of times, you know, the purpose of this podcast for me, at least in the beginning, was I wish there was something for me to listen to when I was just thinking about laborless and really just starting, where I can hear people in our industry talk about their journey and then their maybe aha moment, right? What made them think, you know what, I need to do X. Started tech companies, start this firm, etc. Do you remember what that was when you were either like, there's a problem that needs to be solved and I want to solve it independently, or maybe it was, you know what, I kind of want to work for myself? You know, what was that thing that drove you?
So what happened was I joined Prolink, and I had naively thought that they would. So Immigo is a consultancy and Prolink was run by a lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer. And so I had thought, you know, oh, the lawyers must be so much better, you know, they must know so much more and be so much more kind of intellectual about everything. I mean, not that Immigo was terrible, but I thought the lawyers would be. Anyway, when I joined Prolink, I thought that they would have all of this amazing knowledge. I have always been searching for a place where I can learn a lot from you know, I want to learn from other people, you know. So anyway, so I joined Prolink, and then they had a lot of good stuff, and they had a lot of really good people, but they didn't actually have this big kind of library, you know, this library that I've been imagining didn't exist there either, you know. And they wanted me to write down what I knew, but I had been thinking, no, I came here because I wanted to learn from you, you know. And I was sort of trying to explain this to a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine, and she said, she worked in fundraising at the time. She said, well, you know, in fundraising, we don't have to all go and research all of the legal, you know, tax, this, that, and the other. We have like a central place where we all go and get it from. And I said, yeah, but that's stupid. You know, immigration firms would never do that, because the whole thing is that they're competing with each other. They wouldn't share. And she said, yeah, but why shouldn't they share? And then I, you know, then I was like, oh, of course they should share. Of course they should all share. And why should they all be hiring people and desperately trying to, it turned out basically, which I hadn't ever really understood, but it turned out they were all running around desperately trying to know, you know, so that when the client calls and says, I've got somebody moving to Zimbabwe, but his wife is from here and he's living there and he's cross-border this, that, and the other, you know, all of them want to be able to say, yes, of course we know the answer to that, but they don't necessarily. And this magical, mythical library that I had thought existed somewhere for me to go and sit in didn't actually exist. So then I thought, well, I better just make it, you know. And also at Immigo, when I first started at Immigo, I used to say to when I first started hiring people and training them, I used to say to them, look, if I could write down the whole of what you need to know global immigration wise, then I would. But by the time I'd written it, it would be out of date. But that was, you know, in like 2004 or whatever, you know. So then at this point I was like, oh, you know, actually you could write it down, because you could have it in a database and then you could just update just the little bits. You wouldn't have to, it's not like you have to write it down and then you've got this like giant encyclopedia and it has to be burned and kind of reprinted, you know. You could just update the little chunks. And then I thought, if you did that, then everybody could have it, and then the firms could be competing based on other cool stuff like their prices and their service level and how they interpret the laws and how creatively and cleverly they come up with solutions, rather than just whether they know if it takes 6 weeks or not, you know, because that stuff should be a given. So then once I realized that, and then I thought you could have a case management system that built it all in so that it was predicting what was happening instead of just being kind of on the back foot, you know. So as soon as I realized that this library didn't exist, and second, that it should exist, and thirdly, that if it did exist, you could do it in this way that now was suddenly possible. And also my brother's a software developer. So, you know, like I couldn't really not do it. So I had a really good job, but, you know, and it was fine. But I just thought, I can't, you know, it would be remiss of me to not go and do this thing. So that's what I did.
To not try. Did your brother help you?
So then I called my brother and said, look, I'm going to need to hire some developers. And he was like, no, I'm not letting my little sister fall into the hands of developers, because what will happen is that they'll build half of it and then they'll go off and work on some other project and you'll have to pay them all this money. And I didn't have any money anyway. So he was like, look, I'll help you. So he did. So we went into business together. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. It's so crazy to think about. I mean, the first thing I want to take from that is this idea that you had this vision of what you expected from these firms. And then when you joined, you realized not only that that wasn't necessarily the case, but that they had the same vision from the opposite side, and that's what they were hiring you for. I think number one, to me, that showed me that you were the expert, right? Like
but
they hired.
I'm not. This is the thing. Like they thought I was, and people still think I am, and I'm not. You know, I'm just not. So, but then who is? And you know, none of us is. So then it's got to be written down, and the only way that you can have it is if you collaboratively work on it together, you know? So all of this stuff about, you know, and when I first brought out the database, Immiguru, some people, some kind of well-known global experts were a bit kind of shaken up by it and, you know, and said things to me like, I don't need this because I know all of this stuff. But I thought, no, you don't, because I don't know it all, you know? So I don't know. I don't think you do know it all. And I also think it's okay to not know it all, because how could you? How could we all know as much about all of these countries as one person knows about theirs, you know? I mean, it's silly to pretend that you could. So
it's impossible, and these things change so much. There's so many permutations to fact patterns in this case. It's silly to pretend that any individual human could know, you know, all of this, and more importantly, to your point, stay up to date with all that information.
It's really hard, but it's really tempting to be sort of vain about it. When people start thinking that you know stuff, people are like, oh, you're such an expert, you know. And people do say that to me all the time. And it is quite tempting to be like, oh, well, yes, I am rather knowledgeable, you know. But it's a terrible mistake to get into, because then, you know, you are out of date quickly. And it's, you know, I just think it's a bit of a delusion to try and like build this imaginary thing. Yeah. Because how could you know?
I agree. I want to get to a couple of just comments just to shout some people out. So we've got Benjamin Gabos, Jane Pilkington from Dublin.
Oh, Jane.
Hello, Jane. And we have Ivan Rojas from London as well. We'll try that for now. Yeah, Ivan. Sorry, I missed the. Ben Sukia, just to this goes back, but he said that the lines used to be, some of them were open 24/7 beforehand. And we got some discussion here about sort of lawyers versus non-lawyers. Ben says it's time that the U.S. adapt to the rest of the world, where you don't need to be an attorney but can still deliver high-level compliant service. Time for the U.S. to look around and see what the rest of the world is doing with efficiency and innovation. Interesting point. If you want, Sophie, we can chat about that for a few minutes. I know, as Ken said, that's the Canadian model. There are a lot of countries that have folks actually providing immigration or visa services who have some sort of a license or something else that might not be, they're not lawyers, but they have some sort of proof that they understand the system. I think it makes sense. I mean, just to go off kind of on the side tangent, on our end, on the U.S. side, you know, the new or incoming, our new president, Joe Biden, he signed a few immigration-related executive orders. There's talks of potentially providing a path to citizenship and such for, you know, 10 to 15 million people. We're going to need more resources to kind of handle all that volume. Plus, just generally, once things open back up, I think we have about 20,000 or so immigration lawyers, if I remember correctly. Not that many, you know. And the reality too is that a lot of immigration law firms, rightly so, really rely on incredibly talented and hardworking paralegals who sometimes know way more than the lawyers actually do, at least in terms of like on the ground stuff. So I think there's merit to that. I can't speak on a higher level because there's probably some. I mean, there's definitely benefits and drawbacks to both. How do you view that? You know, lawyer versus. Yeah.
So lawyer versus non-lawyer, just in general. Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with non-lawyers practicing immigration. You know, there's plenty of countries where, you know, like Ken says, in Canada, obviously Australia, UK, you've got registration programs. I think the issue that you have in the US is that the market is so different from in other places. You know, you have so many people in the US who are so, you know, in need of immigration help and advice. So many millions of people who are in need of it. I just feel like if they unregulated the market in the US, what would happen? You know, would there suddenly be loads of kind of shops popping up full of, you'd have to have an alternative licensing system like in Canada and Australia and in the UK. And then that would be okay. But then that's an entire huge thing that needs to be set up. You can't just be like, oh, yeah, it doesn't have to be a lawyer anymore. Yeah. So,
yeah.
But certainly, like generally, in terms of lawyers, non-lawyers, I don't see any reason why being a lawyer necessarily makes you a better immigration consultant. It makes you different, you know, and I think the differences are important and are valuable. And one of the things I really want to happen is I want lawyers and non-lawyers to work more closely together, because I think they have so much to offer each other. And sometimes I've seen that work so well, but sometimes I've seen it a little bit where people can be a bit mistrustful of each other. You know, it can be a bit like, oh, those lawyers think they're better than us. And some lawyers I've seen can be a bit like, oh, these people, you know, these charlatans practicing this thing, they shouldn't be doing it, you know, and you think, well, but, you know, if we work together, you know, why not? And the best lawyers that I know are interested in that opportunity and excited about it, you know? So, yeah.
Absolutely. And there's also space for technology within that entire mix to allow people to collaborate and allow people to streamline the process, et cetera. I wanted to touch on that a little bit. So, you know, you had this idea, you wanted to build out this knowledge management. You also saw the vision of, okay, well, if we centralize the information and if it starts to get updated, we can leverage that into a more sophisticated case management tool that can actually feed, you know, that information back and forth based on what the applicant needs. That's, you know, a really big endeavor. You know, I'm curious, just on a practical matter, what was the first thing you did? I mean, did you leave your firm did you leave your job right away, or did you sort of start kind of moonlighting and doing things on the side? And B, did you just start building, you know, and wait for launch, or like, what did you really do to get that started?
So I left my job straight away, because otherwise the IP of what I did would have belonged to my employer. You know, that was what was in my contract. So I left my job straight away. And then we just started building straight away. Yeah. So I called a friend of mine, Sarah Collins, who is an excellent recruitment agent working in the mobility sphere. I've known her for a long time. So I called her and said, look, Sarah, I've got this idea. What do you think? And she said, yes, you should totally do it. And I said, yeah, but I can't, because I'm the one who, you know, I'm the main breadwinner. You know, how am I going to do this? And she said, well, I know this relocation firm that's looking to take immigration in-house. Why don't you, you know, you could set that up for them as a consultant. So I did. So that was Sterling Relocation. So I then worked 3 days a week for Sterling, which paid my rent. So we were living in a rented house. And then the other 4 days of the week, I worked on my software, and I didn't tell anybody about it because I was really paranoid that somebody would steal the idea and get there first, which is really weird because they haven't, like, even now, you know. But I was very anxious about it, so I didn't tell anybody about the software. So I just did the consulting, and I did a few projects for a couple of other clients. And then the other thing that happened, so this is a bit ridiculous, but the other thing that happened was that I realized 6 weeks after I'd quit and started Peregrine that I was pregnant with my daughter. So that was good. So then I was trying to do all of this stuff while, you know, having, you know, getting more and more pregnant. And then she was born. Actually, she was born the day I signed my first client contract.
Wow.
Yeah. I had to sign it like from the hospital, I think. Maybe I got my brother to sign it. I was like, I can't sign this thing. You have to sign it, you know.
Wow.
And do you want to know another coincidence? So that first client contract that I signed, the day that my daughter was born, was with Newland Chase, who at that time were a small little UK company in Canary Wharf, nothing to do with CIBT or anything like that. And they were my first ever paying, apart from Sterling, who had a license, well, my first ever kind of new client that I went out and got for my software, you know.
Wow. And so with Sterling, you helped set up Sterling's entire sort of internal process. And then through that, I suppose you just said, hey, I'm also building this thing. You should use it.
Yeah. So I went in and met their CEO, Rupert Morley, and said, look, I told him, I said, I'm building this software. I want to do this thing. I don't want a job, but I need some money. And I hear you want to set up an immigration practice. You know, what was happening was that he, as a relocation company, he was outsourcing his immigration to global providers. And my big thing was why would a reload company outsource to a global company that's then outsourcing again to another provider? Shouldn't you just go directly, since your whole thing is supplier management? Shouldn't you be going directly to the providers, you know? And he was like, oh, we don't really, you know, yes, but how? And I said, well, I know how to do that for you, so I can set that up for you. So I, you know, ran an RFP and set up their supplier contracts and, you know, their process flows and SLAs and all that type of stuff.
Wow.
And so that lasted about 6 months. And I kept, I didn't tell them I was pregnant. And I kept every time, so they were in London, and every time I used to go in once or twice a week, and every time I'd say to my husband, you know, fat or pregnant? Do I look fat or pregnant? He'd be like, fat. I'm like, yes, good, that's good.
Just to keep it from them.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, a lesson to me there is, you know, a lot of people leave their job and end up doing something to pay for ends meet while they're building out their company. The opportunity to do that in the industry that you're pursuing is really, really important. And because not only, you know, do you stay sharp and stay up on it, you were able to leverage that sort of side job to be one of your first clients.
Yeah, exactly. And also I could tell them about it. I told them about it, and I was openly, and I told everybody, I was like, I don't work at Sterling. I didn't pretend, you know, nobody wanted me to pretend I was an employee. So I could tell everybody I'm doing global consulting. I never expected to make any money or get many clients for that, but actually I did get quite a few. And you know, the main thing though, the most important thing for me was that I was building this piece of software that relied on information that was provided free by immigration lawyers all around the world. And I had no idea if anybody would be up for that or not. You know, I mean, I was calling all these people going, will you just give me some free stuff, you know? And the amount of support, I don't know if you have found this as well, but I love our industry so much. All of these people all over the world were just amazing to me. They were completely amazing. You know, they were like, yes, Sophie, we'll help you. You know, we'll try this. And I said, you know, it might not work. I might never get any clients. They were all like, yeah, no, we're here for you. We'll help you. It's brilliant. Yeah. I mean,
I've found that,
you know, just ridiculously nice people. Yeah.
I think anybody who works in this industry is inherently a really nice and giving person.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful to hear that. I'm curious at that point, what was your idea of how you were going to monetize this thing?
Well, I thought I'd just sell licenses to people. So I knew that I didn't want to butter my bread on both sides, as it were. So I never wanted to charge my partners for being listed in the database. That is a model that people suggested to me a few times, but I didn't want to do that. I thought that was a bit dishonest, really, you know. So what I did was I said to all of them, I want you to help me. I wrote everything, and I said, I will write it all, and I just want you to check it and help me write it if I know nothing about your country. And that you will do for free, but then your name and your phone number will be in there. And then I will sell licenses to reload firms, immigration firms, and corporates directly. And then when they use it, they will see your phone number, and they'll call you up and hire you, hopefully. Or they might not, you know, but that will be up to them at that point, you know.
Yeah.
So I knew I could sell it to reloads, because I always knew that the big problem with the relocation firm was that they have to be, it's the same thing, they have to be responsible for the success of the immigration program. They have to talk to their clients at a high level about it, but they usually don't know enough about it. So I thought it'd be much better for them if they could just have a little bit. And I thought I could sell it to corporates as well, and I did. And then I thought, you know, I bet I could sell it to the immigration firms. Like, why not? You know, they all need it. Why would you pay somebody, you know, 50 grand, 100 grand a year when you could buy a license from me for a tenth of the price? You know, it's much better and quicker.
And you probably, and you potentially get more and faster, more quickly updated information.
Exactly. So faster. You don't have an HR. You don't, you know, it's good. Right?
Yeah.
What's not to like?
It's a great model. It's a win-win, because people get better and faster information. The folks who provide the information get really strong marketing. So you did this for, I guess, approximately 4 or 5 years. I mean, during that time, was it just like the grind? I mean, more clients, adding folks to the database, continuing to ensure that the software works. Was it that sort of standard technology grind? And were you still doing the consultancy on the side, or did that kind of subside once you really got like the tech product going?
We always did a bit of consultancy, because I always wanted to make sure our knowledge was up to date, like us as well. So we always had both. And actually, very early on, I had a discussion with my brother where I was saying we're an immigration consultancy, and he was like, no, we're a software firm. And I was like, no, we're definitely a consultancy. He was like, we're definitely a software firm. I was like, oh yeah, we are a bit of a soft, you know. So we were always both, you know, always both things at the same time. And I don't know, I wouldn't say it was a grind, because what happened was Ivy was born, my daughter was born, and I, you know, signed that first contract, and then I got some more clients, and that was kind of exciting, you know. And then I actually had another baby in there as well. So I was constantly having these tiny babies at the same time as trying. And then I had the idea for the case management system, you know. So then we were building that as well. So I had, you know, my oldest son was still quite little, and then I had Ivy, and then I had another baby, and I was, you know, the software products and the babies are kind of linked in my mind in a slightly weird way. And then I sold to CIBT when Immigo, the case management system, and Rafa, my youngest son, were 1 year old. So they're actually, he was born, it's kind of the same thing. So, you know, it never really got to the kind of grind stage. It was still really fun and really exciting and kind of growing. And I had all these big plans. So it never felt kind of sort of difficult. I mean, it was difficult because it was hard work and it was stressful, but it never felt kind of like, oh, you know. Also, because I never had huge expectations. All I ever wanted, I didn't have this plan to make this enormous company with, you know, sell it for millions or anything. I just wanted to pay my bills. And also I didn't spend any money on it because my brother was free. I bought one laptop for me. He already had a laptop. So that was all, you know. So all we needed to do was I needed to pay my rent and my gas bill, you know, and my food bills. That's all. And I paid that with a consultancy anyway. And he didn't mind because he's a brilliant software developer who was between jobs, and literally every time he wanted a job, he just had his pick of like 20, you know. They'd be like, which one do you want? Because they all want you. So he didn't mind either. He was like, it's fine. I'll take a few months off, you know. So we didn't really have any pressure. It wasn't like, oh, we've invested all these hundreds of thousands. Now what are we going to do? It was just, you know, we've built this thing. Let's see if somebody wants to, you know, buy a license or two. And I would talk to people, and they did, and it was fun, you know.
That's incredible. It's almost like you just had the honeymoon phase of starting the company and then led to an exit. How big was the team at its peak?
It was only 7 or 8 people. So it's small, really small, you know? Yeah. So
I want to talk about the whole CIBT acquisition, because I think that's super interesting. Again, it's still rare in the industry, right? A little bit more action happening over the past few years from an acquisition standpoint, but you know, from whatever you're allowed to or you can share, what was the impetus for that? I know you were working with Newland Chase. They're now part of the same organization. By then, had they already joined forces, and was it sort of through that initial contract that this conversation started, or was it something else?
Yeah. So what happened? So I'm a bit worried I'm going to be disappointed, because I saw some of the comments on your LinkedIn post earlier. It was like, yeah, an exit, and I just felt like it was just a bit like it just happened. But what happened was, one of my biggest target markets was immigration providers, right? Small providers who wanted to be global and didn't want their clients to go off to, you know, Fragment or Big Four or whatever. So I was going around selling software licenses to small providers, and Newland Chase was a client of mine, and so were various other small immigration firms. And what happened was they started not buying my software licenses because they were themselves being acquired by CIBT. So CIBT was and is, kind of COVID permitting, a very acquisitive company. It grows through acquisition. I mean, that's no secret, you know. So they were running around buying all of these immigration companies, and I was trying to sell these immigration companies software licenses, and then they were going, oh, well, we can't really buy it now because we've just been bought ourselves by CIBT. So then I thought, well, CIBT still needs good software, you know, so they should buy one. So I arranged through, actually not through Newland Chase, through a different one of my clients, a demo to the CIBT people where I was trying to sell them a big license. I was like, you need a 100-seat license at least for your growing immigration company. At that time, it was only about 100, 150 people, you know. And they said, yeah, sure. So I did this demo. And then they said, well, we'd rather buy your whole company than a license. And I said, well, I don't want to sell because I'm doing all of this stuff. haven't done, remember my baby was only 1. I remember saying to the CEO, I was like, I haven't really put my foot down in this vehicle yet. I've just been driving like a family car, and now I'm just about to kind of properly like take off, And he was like, yeah, but you should still sell to us. And I said, no. And then he said, well, it would be, he said, let me send you our letter of intention, And I said, fine, I'll sign the NDA. I'll give you my, because I thought it would be good to know what he's offering. And then what he was offering turned out to be quite appealing. And then I spoke to my accountant and said, what do you think I should do? I said, I'm not even 40 yet. And I don't want to, I haven't done what I want to do. I'm not even 40. And he said, looked at another way, Sophie, you're hurtling towards 40. You have 3 small children. You live in rented accommodation. I was like, yeah, looked at that way. He was like, just take the money. You can always go and do it again if you want to. So I thought, yeah, so that's what I did.
Wow.
So that was my exit. So it wasn't like I had a big plan and I sort of achieved this exit success.
Yeah.
Well, it was the other way around. I didn't want to sell at all.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to buy it. And then I thought it would be stupid not to sell. And also the other thing that was happening, which I think is interesting and of value to other small tech companies, the other thing that was happening was that I was starting to find that as I was talking to potential clients, they were worried that I was going to be acquired. So they had started to say to me, yeah, but if I buy a license from you, what happens when Fragment buys you, or what happens when EMI buys you? And I'd also tried to sell licenses to a couple of the big 4s, and they had looked a bit kind of like, one of them said to me, why didn't you come to us with this idea? We could have built it together. I was like, why would I have done that when I could just do it myself? But they were, people were kind of circling a little bit. And so my clients were getting a bit worried. They were like, you're either going to go bust or you're going to sell. So I had that problem where I had to either scale up really fast, which would have meant taking investment, and I didn't want investment because I didn't want a boss really,
right?
Or I had to sell. I mean, it really was the right time. So yeah, although it didn't feel emotionally like it was.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you think about a lot of the companies that grow very rapidly now, they do end up taking outside investment. And I'll be honest with you, when I was starting Laborless, I was so obsessed with that same trajectory because it's been, even especially now, it's just become so sexy, right? In the industry.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I got 100 million.
It's just it's not, but you get 100 million. It's not your 100 million.
No. And then you've just got a bunch of people in a boardroom telling you what to do. Like, why would you want that? And people kept saying that to me this time. They're like, are you going to go and get investment? Are you going to get, I'm like, no, I don't want a bunch of men in suits in a boardroom telling me what to do.
That's right. And look, the reality is, given the context, maybe you weren't emotionally ready for the sale, but given the context, it sounds like it was either that or, I suppose, take outside funding or continue down the road you were going and not potentially have the same level of success you were thinking.
Exactly.
Because of the hesitation from all these potential partners and clients.
That's the thing. And what my brother said as well, which I thought was very sensible. He said, look, the thing about software is it has a bit of a shelf life, So your software, like, it's the new sexy, trendy thing, and it's all built on the latest stuff. And our case management system looked so beautiful compared to everything that everybody else had. Everyone else had these tiny little fields and little drop-down menus in like font size 8, and ours was all lovely and beautiful and colourful and nice, But that's, I mean, now it still looks nice. I think it still looks nice, but it doesn't look different anymore, So you do have a bit of a sort of, you do date quite quickly, actually, and you don't want to leave it so long that now you've got this kind of old thing that nobody wants anymore.
That's right. Or it's expensive to continuously stay up to date, which is when, to your point, you either need outside investment or the resources of a company that can sort of feed that growth.
Yeah.
So I want to be also conscious of your evening time.
Oh, yeah, it's 10 o'clock.
I want to just a couple of points here from some folks. We have Elena Anderson-Lay. Hey, Elena. Says, great point around regulations and policies changing so often and that your expertise only lasts an hour. This was with respect to
Stuff
you know,
changing, right?
yeah, and like the updates to your database, and just the idea that you constantly need to have good information. We've also got Marco. Hey, Marco, saying, I love it.
I don't know if I should have said that. Maybe you should edit that out.
Listen, it's not a secret that a huge majority of investment dollars, A, comes from basically white men in suits, and B, is very often given to that same demographic. And there's a really conscious effort to move the needle. But, you know, from all the research I've done and all I've heard, that still tends to be a large majority of investment dollars.
I know, right? I know. I mean, I'm probably alienating all the white men in suits, but really, you know, you want to be able to move fast and do the stuff that you need to do without having to discuss it at length for a long time with a business plan. You know, you want to just do it. You've got to just go and do it.
Raising money is not easy. I've never done it. I'm lucky that we're still bootstrapped, but raising money is not easy. I want to ask you, you know, you were at CIBT, Newland Chase for some time. And recently, you know, you've left, you're now on your own and you're starting your brand new venture. So I wanted to end on sort of asking you, what are you working on now? And you know, what are your thoughts about the industry? So where do you fit in with your new venture, and sort of where do you think the industry is going that maybe you're excited about?
So what I'm trying to do now is, what I still believe that the most important thing is to bring people together. I still think that collaborating, you know, across the law, non-law divide and globally is the most important thing. And I think the industry lends itself to collaboration really well, clearly. And I think that the current situation that we're in now, where we're all from home and we're all talking to each other from our, you know, houses in our, you know, pajamas, I'm like literally wearing pajama trousers, is, you know, it's exciting. So what I want to do is try to create a space and an opportunity for people to come together. And my heart is with the small firms. You know, I want to help small companies reach big clients, because I think that small companies provide excellent knowledge and service. I care about the knowledge and the expertise, and I think it's important for clients to be able to get to that. And I think that software is a really important part of that. So I don't have a new software product, but I am considering if, you know, I am thinking about one.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. So,
I mean, you got to, right? How would you not?
Yeah.
So, you know.
And especially because you've had the taste, you had an idea, it worked, right? And there's so much left in this industry. There's so much opportunity. So can you talk a little bit about, Owl Immigration, right? That's the new firm. And just for folks out there, it's owlimmigration.com. I know there's a fun story, if you can share quickly, about the name. You know, your original company was Peregrine, from Peregrine Falcons, cool birds. Owls are also incredible creatures. Of course, flight, migration, you know, there's a whole big theme. Can you share just a little bit about the name?
So owl, so I called it owl because I wanted another bird. I wanted a bird that people could spell easily for a change, and because I care about knowledge and wisdom, and obviously an owl represents those things. So, and then I thought, oh, cool, it could stand for online, worldwide, local, and I thought that would be kind of cool because I want to do a bunch of stuff online, and I care about it being global, and I care a lot about local expertise as well. So actually, you know, I like all those things. So I was like, that's kind of cool. And I thought I could have a nice little owl logo and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, brilliant, I'm going to call it Owl. And my children all agreed, you know, because my children kept throwing out every suggestion that I made before that. So I did call it Owl. And then I discovered only after that I told everybody that there was another company called Owl and Snake. I hadn't realized. I mean, I don't know how I hadn't Googled. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I hadn't realized. I think I'd just been so obsessed with domain names that I hadn't actually just put a pure Google in, you know. And when I went to register the name Owl Immigration Limited, it had already been taken by the guy who owns Owl and Snake. And I was mortified because I had actually emailed him to try and make friends with him. And I thought, you know, he doesn't want to be my friend and he's not replied to my email, and now he's taken my company name. And why does he hate me? He never even met me, and we could have been friends, because he does UK immigration, mostly spousal ancestry, like personal applications, which I don't do UK immigration. So I had thought it was kind of a perfect fit. Anyway, I was really upset and I didn't know what to do. And I thought I'm going to have to change the whole thing. And I just spent about 50 years I drew my own logo, and it took me ages, you know? So I was like, oh, I've just made a website with loads of pictures of owls all over it, you know. Anyway, then I called this guy and he answered and I said, I'm Sophie. And he was like, oh, hi. And I said, oh, yeah, hi. I said, you know, you took my name. Like, why would you do that? And it turned out that he had received a couple of emails before Christmas from some actual people who wanted him to import. This does sound like I've been drinking, which I have, but the story is true and real. He had received emails from people from Nigeria who wanted him to transport live owls to and from Nigeria, and they'd found him online because his company was called Owl and Snake. So he had replied to them saying, no, I don't transport live owls, and I don't want anything to do with your crazy illegal wildlife business. And then his email bounced back, and then he emailed me, and I had not set up my MX records properly. That morning, it was literally one morning, and his email bounced back, and he got the same error message. So he said, you know, I thought you were, you know, I got the same error. I was like, Richard, it's just a standard error message. He said, you know, I thought you were part of the Nigerian owl transport consortium. I was like, no, I'm just me. I'm normal. He was like, oh, and I realised that now. And then he said, you know, I didn't think anybody else would have such a stupid company name, because he said mine was invented by my 6-year-old. I was like, Richard, I also have a 6-year-old. He was like, oh gosh, I didn't know. So anyway, then I said, will you give it back? And he said, yeah, sure. And it was so nice because he didn't have to. At that point, he owned it. And he said, no, I'll sign it over to you. It's fine. So he signed the paperwork and he gave it to me, and now it's all fine. And he's really, really nice. So I actually put a link to him on my website. So if anybody needs UK spousal ancestry, that type of stuff, they should call him, Richard at Owl and Snake.
I love that. That is such a funny, hilarious story.
I know, right?
And I think you wrote a version of that story on your website that I know I checked out the other day.
I left out the wildlife part.
The wildlife part. Got
I thought
it.
it was too crazy. People would think it was too weird.
And maybe not to implicate anybody, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's so hilarious. And so, okay, and I guess the last thing I'm curious about is, what are you looking to do with Owl Immigration? I mean, right now, I guess, is it a consultancy like the way that, you know, similar to what you had with Peregrine, and then you're percolating thoughts about technology, or like, can you share a little bit about that?
That is basically what it is. So I'm doing consultancy. So the consultancy I want to do is to help people develop their immigration practices. So I already have a couple of clients who want advice in that area, and I'm really happy to provide it. So to help people who want to move from doing one country to doing global, or, you know, expand the services they're doing, or just to do them better, you know, to understand. And I'm, you know, I know how to do that. I'm quite good at global immigration, so I can come in and I can look at what people are doing and help them do it better. I like things to be done well. I mean, I'm fortunate that I am no longer the person that I was 10 years ago. When I set up Peregrine, like I said, I did not have any money. I used to print out my PowerPoint presentation for clients, and I'd go to a client meeting, and sometimes I could tell they didn't want to buy my software, and they'd go, I'll keep the brochure to be nice. And I'd be like, no, it's fine. Because it cost me £5 to print it out, you know, and it mattered like that.
Yeah.
It was a big deal for me. And now, because of the CIBT buyout, actually I'm in an extremely privileged and fortunate position where it doesn't really matter that much if I make money or if I don't make money, you know. So what I'm trying to do is help people grow their companies. And I'm also thinking about a little bit of software. But the thing I'm most excited about is my forum, you know. So I've got on my website, I've got a little forum, and I'm trying to make a place where people can come, talk to each other, you know. I mean, obviously LinkedIn is brilliant for that stuff, but it's so huge, it's easy to get a bit lost, and the stuff that you post disappears. So I was trying to find something that Massimo in Belgium posted the other day. He posted a brilliant article about cross-border stuff, and I couldn't find it because it had just sort of sunk beneath the LinkedIn waves, you know. And I thought, if I made this forum and I could keep things that people put there so that you could find it easily. So imagine if instead of buying a license for Immiguru, you just for free go to my website and type in Spanish posted workers, and it instantly comes up with the post that somebody's put there about it, and the link to that person, and you can call them and contact. And I don't have to charge anybody for it because I didn't, you know, all I've done is set up like a little, like, that's kind of cool, you know. And then I thought I could have some online events, maybe I could do a few interviews like you do, you know, like just give people a bit of profile and get, you know, the smaller companies out into the limelight a little bit more, because I believe that they have so much to offer and I want to help them. So that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm not trying to make another, bunch of cash. I just want to have a bit of fun,
Yeah. And create value. And one thing that I'll say, I am so driven by small businesses. And I feel like when you talk to founders of small businesses, whether in our industry or any other industry, their stories are just as inspiring and just as thoughtful as founders of massive companies. These are people who have skills, who want to provide value to our industry, and maybe they chose not to grow their firm to 100 people, but to keep it to 6 for their own philosophical reasons.
Exactly. And they chose not to work for a big firm. I mean, most people who work in small firms, or many people, especially the employees, they chose that. They could have gone, it's not like they had to work there because they couldn't get a job somewhere else. They chose it because they wanted to work in that environment. And I think that's cool, and to be sort of celebrated. Yeah.
That's crazy. Wow. So, I always like to end, or I try to end on kind of with more of a fun question. Before I get there, I just want to note that it's so fascinating to hear your story of how you so naturally progressed from, your first couple of jobs in Immigo and Prolink, and then how you launched Peregrine and sort of, the steps you took. Right? It was a consultancy and at a tech company at the same time, and then a case management was sort of built out of it. I mean, the whole thing is so almost organic. But in hindsight, it all makes a ton of sense. But I suppose at any given point, it's like, I would imagine you're not quite sure that this is really going to work out or where it's going to go tomorrow or the next week. I guess what I love about these stories is that hopefully for people who are listening who might have their idea and haven't started, or maybe who are in the beginning stages, or frankly, someone like me, my company has been around for now 3+ years. But I still feel like we just launched yesterday, right? I mean, there's still so much room. I think your story and similar stories remind me to just to keep going. If the past already makes sense, even if the future is not yet certain, keep going, because clearly there's something working.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what the future. Yeah, exactly. You don't need to know what it's going to be. Like, how could you know? You've got to just do what you've got to do. I mean, I totally have imposter syndrome. I'm always like, whoa. But yeah, I mean, you have to just not try and predict what's going to happen or control what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You just have to be your best person, and you have to trust the people around you. I mean, that's really why I have imposter syndrome, because people often, especially now since I sold, people say to me how impressive I am, and I really don't think that I am. What's impressive is the amount of people who helped me out of the kind of goodness of their hearts. I mean, that's what's impressive to, and I do feel like I've done a good job bringing people together. But if they hadn't have wanted to be brought together in the first place, if they hadn't have understood and believed in the power of coming together and building a thing, and that was them, not me, so I think that's awesome.
Amen. Appreciate the people who are helping us along the way.
Yeah.
So I want to end on one fun question. What's your kind of favorite memory from living in China for those 6 months? I'm curious, because I've never been, and I'm so fascinated, and now travel's restricted. Any fun memory that sticks out?
So we lived in Qingdao. Qingdao is spelt in kind of modern Chinese translate, it's spelt with a Q, so Qingdao. But in the Wei Giles system, which is the old way of transliteration Chinese, it's spelled Tsingtao. So Tsingtao looks like Tsingtao, it's pronounced Qingdao. Anyway, it's the beer, right? So you've probably seen it, like a million of those green beer bottles. So we lived in Qingdao, which is where the brewery is, and we used to we had a curfew. We weren't allowed to stay out late at night, so sometimes we used to go to the brewery and buy a barrel of beer, and our dormitory was at the top of this really, really steep hill. Once actually my friend, I made him carry this watermelon. I made him carry this watermelon all the way up the hill, and then when we got to the top, there was a guy selling watermelon. Anyway, we used to roll sometimes a big barrel of beer up and then sit on the roof drinking it. Oh, that was fun. It's not a very good Chinese memory, but it's a good Qingdao memory. You know?
No, you know what? That's one of those things where if I'm lucky enough to travel to a place where I know somebody, those moments are so much more memorable than going to the museum or the game or the beautiful monument. Those sort of human moments.
Yeah, you know what else you can do in Qingdao? Or you could go to the brewery with a plastic bag or like an empty bottle or anything. But sometimes people just go with like a little, like not like a huge carry bag, but like a little, you know, like the ones you get your vegetables in. Mm-hmm. Do you do that? So like a little tiny plastic bag, and you can go to there was a little hole in the wall, and you could pay, and then they'd turn a tap on you, just fill your bag up, and people would go to the park and hang it over a branch, and then you'd be in the park having a picnic, and just you can drink it out of straw out of your plastic bag. Wow. That was nice too. And in every park in China at that time as well, there was always an English corner where anybody who wanted to learn English would just go and talk English to each other. So Chinese people talking English to other Chinese people, because usually in most Chinese towns, cities, there aren't a bunch of native speakers, you know. So if you would go to the park and walk past the English corner, everyone would be like, please, will you come? And so you could just go and like have a little chat, and people were so pleased to have the opportunity to speak to somebody. Although they always wanted Americans. They were always disappointed that I wasn't American.
That's so funny, because if you walked by a park in New York City, people would be like, please come talk to us. We're so bored of our accents. Wow, that's so cool. Well, Sophie, thank you so much. This has been such an amazing and enlightening conversation. I appreciate you, especially staying up so late. And thank you to everybody who stayed up with us, especially folks on your side of the Atlantic, but frankly, anywhere. It's already 5 o'clock here on a Friday. People are trying to retire, and I'm so happy they spent their afternoon with us. So yeah, Sophie, thank you. Really, this was such a pleasure, and I appreciate you joining and taking the time.
Thank you so much, Ro. I love what you're doing with this stuff. I think it's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to say that from, as a founder talking to another founder in the industry, it's always just enlightening to learn about not just the big moments, but also all the millions of little moments that led up to whatever that big moment is, you know, whether it's an exit or a huge client or something else. And I think Sophie just had shared all of that. So thank you all so much for hanging out. Please come back next Friday. And until then, stay safe and peace out.